everyone, and to this glorious evening in Penarth. And thank you so much for coming to what I'm sure is going to be a very wonderful occasion. And this man on my right, I would like you to welcome with me. It's John Metcalf, Artistic Director of the Vale Glamorgan Festival, and join with me in celebrating John's 70th birthday year. I'm sure many of you are familiar with John's music, and many more of you will be familiar with his curatorship of the Vale Glamorgan Festival over the years. It's quite a staggering achievement for somebody to have managed to keep a festival going for nearly 50 years. I think that's quite unique within the UK. And certainly since 1992, a festival that has focused exclusively on the music of living composers. John has written extensively in a number of genres. Chamber music that we're going to hear tonight, courtesy of the wonderful ensemble Midwest, come from Denmark. Also orchestral pieces, and you'll get a chance to hear the cello symphony on Friday night, and also, of course, opera, of which he has written 7. John, a lot of classical music programming is performer-based. And by contrast, the Vale Glamorgan Festival is not only repertoire first, but it's guided by a principle of composer portrait. So it's very, very good to be able to do a portrait of you yourself. And you're also so generous with your skills regarding other composers. I'd like to start by asking you how you started as a composer. I believe somewhere you said that you were 9 when you first started.
I started when I was 9, and I started without real musical training. I had a very aggressive piano teacher when I was 6 years old, who I used to have to, I was away at boarding school in Bridgend, and to get to the piano room, I had to walk along a dark corridor into a room where the roof leaked. So there was a sort of drip into the bucket, sort of involuntary metronome. And the teacher believed in slap across the wrist if you played the wrong note, the ruler. So that was really a real deterrent to learning the piano. And after a couple of years of that, braving it out, I gave up the piano and took up composing. And that's pretty much the way it's stayed ever since.
Well, there have been many, many adventures along the way, including sojourns in Canada and a stint at the Swansea Festival and so on. I'm very interested, if we can fast forward perhaps, to something you said about not having found your voice as a composer until you were 45. Can you tell us something about that and what that pivot point was about?
Well, I don't know whether I'm alone, but I always feel it's really hard to be yourself. It's really, really hard to do the things that you believe you should do. I'm not talking about any sort of libertarian or views, I'm just talking about just realizing your own, finding your own voice. And I really didn't do that. And when I wrote the piece you're going to hear tonight, Rest in Reason, was the last but one piece that had a couple of moments of harmonic change in it. And then, after that piece, I wrote Paradise Falls. By that time, obviously, I was really, really familiar with Arvo Pärt and Goretzky and lots and lots of composers where it was just purely white note music. But when I wrote this piece, Paradise Falls, I was still shocked when I wrote it. And when I presented the performance, I said, look, I'm really sorry, but unfortunately, there's no chromatic change in the piece. And they said, don't be silly. So I knew all about that, but actually to make that point where I was actually writing what I wanted to write. Because I think it's fair to say that when I was young, and Rian remembers this too, because when we were at university, it was pretty much you could only be taken seriously if you were writing essentially serial music. And certainly, the earliest that I remember of just purely diatonic music was hearing the first Steve Reich musicians tour, which I think it was in 1970 in the Contemporary Music Network. So it took me all those years, and even with people like Petrus, whose music I also knew then, even with their example, I still found it really hard I just lacked confidence. I just lacked confidence to do what I wanted to do, and it was only when I reached the point. I'm talking with Petrus the last few days, I'm just aware that he writes music. He writes the music he wants to write. Eventually I learned that lesson. Just do the thing that you want to do, and do it truthfully and sincerely, and don't be influenced by other things. I mean, do it kindly, do it gently, do it respectfully of others, but be yourself.
You've spoken a lot about the importance of communicating with audiences, and obviously as a festival curator yourself. It strikes me that as well as being brave as a composer at that time, there's an element of that bravery that you've needed to step into as a festival curator in saying this music is worth listening to. How's that been, that relationship between composing and curating?
I always feel very nervous when people say, "Oh, you're very brave." Am I? So yes, Minister. It's a very brave decision, Minister. Oh, is it? I am very much nurtured by it's certainly been a two-way street for me. I've learned so much from the composers who've come to the festival. And I would go back to saying that I think it's important to build a bridge with audiences. I really, really think that the audience in the festival is a wonderful audience because they will listen to many, many things. And I think what helps is to have some music in the concert where there's a common language. If you're learning a language and you go to a room, you're quite happy to, under the right circumstances and encouragement, a little bit of kindness to try it out. But if you go into a room, I mean, if the Latvian choir, we hear the other we went into the room, they were speaking Latvian, and we probably would just switch off. Because we think, well, we're not going to be able to do this. So we might as well just be quite calm within ourselves and realize it. So it struck me that I don't really buy into the whole dichotomy of music that's accessible or modernist. I don't really buy into that. What I do think is that it's really, really important to try and wrest back some of the language from purely commercial use. I think the commercial use of the language devalues it. It's as though you want to be a poet, and actually the copywriters, advertising copywriters, have taken all the best bits of language. So I think that some of the vernacular language is important to music. So you're not just left with a little kind of what's left over from what other powerful people have used. In our case, a lot of sites for commercial use. You're not just left with that you've got the whole palette. And although we have followed a certain path with the Vale Festival, we've also had quite a diverse lot of composers, and we're not pejorative about style, and we're certainly not seeking to make things easier for the audience. We want them to be there, but we're not trying to. Challenge is the sincerest form of flattery. You can do better, you can understand it, you can go further. That's what you tell a child. Say, the world's your oyster. That's what you want to tell a child. So you don't want to tell an audience, oh, you'll only be happy with these safe things. You want to tell them, there's a world out there. It's inevitable that what we don't know is much more interesting than what we know, because there's so much more of it. There's just so many things we don't know that it's bound to be fascinating, and there's just so much out there.
That leads me to a question I have about your compositional process. I'm very interested to know what inspires you, what your starting point is. I mean, it strikes me that your music is a wonderful balance between, in the way that the title of one of the works, Resting Reason and Passion, tonight, sums it up in the sense that there's a delicate balance between expression and form, which is very particular, very spacious quality. And I was wondering what inspires you to write?
There are extremes in my music. It's a very, very emotional music. So if it's going to be brainy and intellectual, then I will choose something that is extremely hard to do, like writing a palindrome for 6 pianos, for example. And if it's going to be music that is based on melody, then I will want to write the melody until the tears are running down my cheeks. I remember writing one piece, I was sitting in the room, and it just got dark and dark. I was still writing the music, and I was just crying all the time. Because it's very, very important to have things that move us. I'm studying out somebody who's afraid of crying. I think it's a wonderful thing to do because it just releases so much out of you. And similarly, if you're going to write rhythmic music, I have to say apologies to generations of performers here, then you really want to write music that's got a huge amount of life and rhythm. I was looking at I was in cello symphony rehearsal today. Group of 9 across 4 with different multiple rhythms and ties, and so very, very rhythmic. So in other words, whatever you do it to its fullness. I really believe in that. But yes, there is a dichotomy in my music between there's a very pure, direct emotional expression and an extremely rigorous form. I mean, cello symphony is part of a series of works. I wrote for 5 or 6 years only diatonic to E flat major. So I never wrote a chromatic. I wrote in Chair and Love, which was an opera, about 75 minutes. The last but one note, I put a B natural to see whether the audience was still awake. And to me it sounds very, very startling. So for 5 years I wrote in E flat major, but I also I wasn't trying to be minimalist, I was trying to be maximalist. I tried all the usual gesture that people have in music, all the tricks of orchestration, everything else. So I didn't restrict myself in that way, but on one level, my music is always exceptionally rigorous. And that's maybe something that maybe performers don't hear. Players know it. I mean, it is hard, isn't it, Matt?
Would you say that, Matt?
Yes, I think so.
Matt's the violinist and viola from Ensemble Metcalf.
I think it's fascinating music to play, not only because it's so moving, so when one's playing it or listening to it, it's an extraordinary emotional journey that one goes through, but it's a process that, quite unlike almost everything else that I've played, in that the rhythmic complexities have to be mastered in a sort of intellectual way, but then thrown away and done with feeling instead. But it takes quite a long time, especially given the way that we've been trained as classical musicians, to make that leap from the, in inverted commas, contemporary music, that rhythm that have to be worked out, to then thinking, okay, now let the rhythm just be what it is, and go beyond it.
And one of the pieces tonight, Rest in Reason, is based on a very, very simple foundation of 4 notes.
Really simple, yeah. It's a descending, there's 4 notes in the bass, and those notes come round again, as they do in Paradise Haunts.
Yeah.
And it's a very simple device.
Do you use a variation a great deal, or different kinds of it?
Pretty much always. That's all my pieces are. It's essentially sets of variations, and usually continuous. not always variations on the classical principle where you have a harmonic basis which reiterates itself, but quite often that is not anything really new. It's just you discover it newly. So yes, my pieces are based on variation.
One of the things that strikes me about your music, and it's very, very varied across your output and across the years, is that there's a real sense of teamwork between the performers. I mean, in the cello symphony, for instance, there isn't necessarily the conventional sense of the cellist versus the symphony orchestra kind of having a battle. I don't know whether that's right. What do you think?
It is right, Steph. You're absolutely right. If you think about the cello, which is a middle register instrument, the problem with the 19th century idea of the individual against the crowd, unless the individual is a pianist or possibly a violinist, there's only going to be one winner, and that's going to be the crowd. So you really don't want to set that up. So in cello symphony, I've done something different. I've introduced the cello in a group of middle range instruments, which include the orchestra cello, which were divided into four solo celli in the orchestra. And then I've introduced male voices and organ in the middle register. So that, and there are passages for just 5 cellos on their own in cello symphony, just the 5 celli. And oddly enough, filling out the middle register means you haven't got so many of the higher harmonics which get in the way of hearing the cello. So even today in the first rehearsal where there's the usual kind of, problems with the parts and this, that and the other, and they also haven't got used to the piece, they don't know the piece, they haven't heard the balance. Even today, you could hear that it's going to be there. It's going to work. And when I look at the score, even though I've heard it and I know it does work, and I wrote it and I thought it would work, when I open the score, I look at it and I think, is this going to work? And here is a different ball today with more upper strings. Yes, it will work.
And I'm very interested, particularly with one piece tonight, Not the Stillness, from 1998, in that regard, because you wrote it for the very famous combination of Messiaen's quartet at the time. What sort of balance, challenges did that present in terms of the relationship between the players?
This is a very, very austere piece, really, on some levels. Well, not austere, but very, very, it's very pared down. There's places in the score where one of the players will just play one note for a bar, and then it'll be just a slow note and other slow notes, or 2 players playing slow notes. And it's a piece that's slow throughout. And there's a lovely quote about my music in the program. I don't know where it came from, I don't know who said it, but somebody said, that there's a good music for, I can't remember what it was. But anyway, this piece is a very meditative kind of piece. It's an extremely still piece of music.
I've got a lovely quote actually from Paul Conway, who once said that you could spin memorable chorales from the sketchiest of plain sunlight fragments, which strikes me that that's a wonderful compliment. And that was, I believe, that was actually about Rest in Reason.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's very lovely. I'd like to ask you sort of more broadly about your inspiration in terms of a composer in the world, being a composer in the world. I know that ecology matters very greatly to you, and I often get the sense, and it sometimes comes through in the actual inspiration, it seems, for your pieces, that you're very interested in the idea of journeying. Physically walking, physically mapping lines, something there about song lines, about maybe ancient druidic pathways, I don't know, something to do with the relationship between you as a musician and the land.
Well, the first thing to say is that I hadn't realised till I'm just talking with Petrus the last few days, is that his music and mine are both informed by a predominantly rural sensibility rather than an urban one. I know there's some people that say that everyone's urban now because you can't fail to be urban because there's so many of us. But that's the first thing to say. Then the second thing is that there's a certain type of even though sometimes my music is slow, sometimes there's like a real pulse to it. It's not like Steve Reich, it's not motoric in that way, but there is a real pulse to it. And pieces like the string quartet, through Breikart and Paths of Song, that's based on a single pulse all the way through. You don't always hear the pulse, but it's always, the whole piece is in the same tempo. It's another way that I've used of organising a piece. You know, write it all in E flat major, do this, do that, or just have a pulse, like Andreessen's Die Schnellheit, for example. It's a similar kind of piece. So in that piece, that was based on the idea of walking. And in fact, and this last, which we'll hear tonight, the cello piano piece, that was part of a group of pieces called Transports, which was a project that I did in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Rome and in New York with the artist Catherine Webster. And that piece was about, Catherine had walked around Wales for about 15 months, or taken public transport, and she'd done sketches. And they were all inspired by the landscape, and they were all completely abstract. There were no naturalistic features in them. They were all abstract. And that inspired me a lot. And so I wrote pieces, some pieces based on some of the places she'd been and she'd painted. And then we put musicians in front of the paintings. And then we got huge paintings which we moved around to create different environments. Yes, I mean, Ernest Last, the cello piano piece we'll hear tonight, is inspired by the painting rather than the place. But Ernest Last is the nature reserve on the south side of the Derby Estuary at Borth. And my piece is there, and you can go and listen to the piece in Canada we'd have called it interpretive. I can't remember what the word is, but anyway, the building is there. But it was also played, the first performance was played in front of a large painting.
So it seems to me that sometimes one of the great challenges for a composer is balancing the interior time of the sheer amount of time that you have to spend on your own in a room writing, and actually the going out and the being social and the social aspect. And I was wondering how that is for you, particularly as you're so active with the Vale Glamorgan Festival and many other very external projects. What's that like?
Well, the thing that really helped me, and that I would wish for young composers, was that at several points in my life, I was able to spend a long time on my own writing music. The first thing happened when I went to the United States in 77, 78. It's one of the 5 bicentennial arts fellows, because we exchanged creative artists in the US and Britain in that year. I had a whole year, and so when I got the award, I said, so can you tell me what the framework is? And they said, there isn't one. You can do exactly what you want. So I did spend 5 or 6 weeks driving across the States in an open-top car. But when I worked, I just worked really, really hard, and I learned the discipline of having a long, long time in the room, which was great. And then I got the Glamorgan Arts Fellowship in 1984, and I suddenly I was there in Glamorgan, and of course, it did what it does in Glamorgan, which is, it rained for 9 months. And so I was in this room, and I wrote music. And I remember somebody saying about the rehearsal process that if you've got a was Keith, yes, it was Keith. And he said, if you've got, a 3-week rehearsal period, and about halfway through, about just after halfway through, it gets to kind of a flat point in the rehearsal room. It lasts, for a day and a half. And he said, if you have, if you've just got 2 days rehearsal, it happens just, in the middle of the second morning. But if you've got 54 weeks, which they had for Soldaten by Zimmerman for New York City Opera, then that kind of slump in the rehearsal took about 6 or 7 weeks of really sort of difficult days. But the point about this is that if you're composing, you've got a lot of time, you really, really learn. And I always say to composers, just take more time. Just take more time. It takes a lot of time to do it really well. And having the discipline of sitting in that room and you're gonna, and you've been there for 4 or 5 days, and you've just scrapped the work that you did the previous week, and that's a big step forward. That's the kind of discipline that you need for a composer. Once you've got that, then you can deal with it will undoubtedly reflect wonderfully on my life that Petrus and I have spent more time this week and the composers that come. It will be a great inspiration to me, not because I'll want to write any more like him than I have done before, but simply because I sense the same strength of purpose there and commitment. I know he's writing wonderful music now, and so there's a community between us. At least that's the way I feel it. And that strengthens me. So it's not a distraction. It's something that helps me.
It struck me that we've talked and we've been hearing Petrus music this week, and we talked about how things changed inextricably in the 1990s, and that seems to coincide with the time when you said that you found your voice as a composer. So is there anything that you'd like to say about the process of collaboration and discovery across nations, particularly perhaps small nations who may be emerging?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and there's no quick answer to that.
No.
I mean, the process of collaboration, first of all, if you work with wonderful players, they'll always find ways of suggesting you to do things better than you've done them. It's not the fact. I always think that in creative work, commitment needs to be to the outcome, not to the means. So when you work with people who know much more about the violin or the cello or the clarinet than you do, because we're not all Elgar, we seem to know a lot about everything, all those instruments, then obviously you want to work with them. And it's not in any way changing your creative, it's just expanding your technical means. And that process of collaboration is, I think, now better established in opera, where you obviously need it, because the composer's an amateur in so many of the disciplines needed for opera. A complete amateur, in the best sense of the word, but an amateur. As for collaborations between small nations, I am very hopeful for Wales, because I feel that we're unencumbered by tradition, we're unencumbered by expectation. That's both good and bad, I think. But I think we have a lot of interesting things here. And so I think that you don't necessarily expect something that's going to have an impact on the development of musical history to come out of Cardiff or out of Riga. But actually, I feel that it might. I think it might have a better chance than some other places where there's so many expectations, where there's so much scrutiny, so much expectation. Because here we are now, and actually we have a great access to an awful lot of things that in the past only people in metropolitan centres would have access to. And although there's no substitute to hearing live a concert like tonight, there's still all sorts of ways that you can get hold of that and listen to that. So I feel that we have, whereas 10 years ago, 15 years ago it is now, 60, I would have been pessimistic about devolution, because I would have thought that we'd have a lot to do before we get to realizing ourselves as a nation. Now I feel that we're maybe only a few years away from being what the Quebecois would call a distinct society with our own traditions. And we should encourage all the assembly members and our arts council to help us to continue that process of evolution, so that part of our role is to make, it's not simply bread and circuses and an enlightened form of entertainment, but our role is actually to aspire towards being part of a process of evolution of the creative arts that we're involved in. And so we're not just doing some decorative event for this evening where people go away and they'll have had an interesting time. The second piece was a bit puzzling, but I found it quite interesting. I'd like to go there again. We're not just simply doing that, we're doing something more, which is we're trying to touch people and we're trying to do it in a way which will be transformative. We'll give people a different perspective. We'll articulate in a different way the way that they see and hear and experience and feel things. And I think we can do that. I think that's what the festival aspires to do. We aspire to be in a changed environment in 15 or 20 years' time, whether we're here or not. But we aspire that there will have been a change. And I sense that coming about.
So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask John, either about his music or any other aspect of the festival side? Gareth?
Yeah, it's fair to have John's music and John's stuff quite well. And I wonder if you could say some more about something which you touched upon when Steph asked you about his procedure in classical music and not stillness. I wonder if you could say something about psychic procedure in your work, and if you attribute that to a particular influence at a particular time, if it's something you perhaps just caught yourself doing.
Can I just repeat the question for everybody?
Yeah.
Gareth has just asked John to talk about cyclic procedures in his music.
I think it comes about, Gareth, because, I could talk about the purely musical means, because there's a circular kind of thing about there's 4 notes in it's actually 3 and not stillness. But for me, cyclical forms come about more like, for example, writing and recording over 24 hours of the day. They come about because I've tried to take away, although there are extremes of contrasts in my music, we're talking about that in rehearsal today, I try not to elevate conflict or oppositional things in a structural way. So I feel that I've broken completely with the 19th century in that respect. I don't want to use the structure of the music to elevate oppositional ideas. And so in other words, if it was an opera, you'd reach the point where tragedy was going to happen, the seven steps of Greek tragedy, and then you're utterly gutted when it does. Because it's all been set up, and you're going to have a certain emotion. So I'm trying to approach structure in a slightly different way, which is that there is light and shade, but it's not light and shade that's connected to a structural purpose that will lead every listener to a particular emotional point. And also to break down hierarchies. I know that you can, that many good things can come from that, and I don't think, I'm not against hierarchies for 19th century music, But I'm for questioning them in 21st century music as far as how they apply, in what ways they apply. I mean, Jose, who played in the lunchtime recital today, wonderful flautist, says, he always calls me maestro. It's very lovely. I think it's partly fun. He always calls me maestro. I said, drop me off here with you, Jose. I can walk the whole of it. He said, no, maestro's not going to walk there. I'm going to drop you off. And so it's those things like maestro and diva. It's just the language. I mean, in opera's my favourite. I think opera should be renamed upstairs, downstairs. Because you've got the pit. And imagine you're in the pit all the time. It's just the language is, you know, it's worth thinking about the language. And yeah, so I thought, you know, as I thought of putting writing an opera where I put the singers in the pit. And Oxford saying, see how you get on with that.
I love the idea of Maestro Metcalf, actually. It seems so bizarre. I'm aware that we have to take our seats very shortly and the performers need to get ready. So I think, with your generosity, I would like to say thank you once again to John and congratulations once again. And thank you for coming, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful concert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just say a couple of words on behalf of the festival to mark the forthcoming birthday of John Metcalf and the birthday that has just gone of Petrus. I can't think of any other festival where the artistic director founded it 48 years ago and is still running it, not only still running it, but bringing a very fresh approach to it every single year. For the last 25 years, John has directed the Vale of Glamorgan Festival in a specifically contemporary programme and almost single-handedly provided Wales with a week to 10 days of contemporary music every year, played at the highest international level of performance, ranging through what now must be hundreds of different composers in that particular time. Running a festival is a very hard job. I know, I've had a go at it, and I gave it up, but John sort of keeps on going somehow. It's a hard job, not only to run a festival, but actually to sort of keep an output of music coming out all the time as well. Only 2 years ago, John finished his opera Under Milkwood and mounted that almost single-handedly, very successfully. And as you heard tonight, he still continues to compose a marvellous stream of new pieces all the time. We're also delighted to have Petrus with us this year and to come here and hear a week and 10 days of your music. So it's wonderful to have you here. And I don't want to keep you any longer, but I'd just ask you if you'd raise your glass and to these two marvellous composers on their 10 years.
Happy birthday!
What happens?
And we have the cake as well. It has to be cut up.
Joint cutting of the cake. They're nice. They are lovely. I think maybe you could do it like a slice like that. Make a wish. We'll be very happy together.